Okay, all set.
Okay, let's call a meeting to order. Lake Forest Park Planning Commission, November 18th, 7 p.m. Meeting has started. Could I ask another member of the commission to read the land acknowledgement, please?
I'd be happy to do that. We'd like to acknowledge we are on the traditional land of a rich and diverse group of Native peoples who have called this area home for more than 10,000 years. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the descendants of these Native peoples who are still here today.
Thank you for that. I think we all should have the agenda in front of us. Can any questions about the agenda, or could I get a motion to approve the agenda as written?
I motion to approve the agenda as published.
I second.
No questions, no issues. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Shall we go ahead and approve the agenda as written? Everyone in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
All right. Approved as written. Next on the agenda, approval of meeting minutes, and I'll just note that I was not at the meeting, so I'm not going to chime in here. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes and review them for any inaccuracies?
They looked fine to me. They were not super detailed.
Any further questions, or I would entertain a motion to adopt the minutes as written?
I move to adopt the minutes as written.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it. Sorry. I feel like we're all
All
a little
right.
sleepy or something tonight.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Rolling forward here. Let's see. Okay, now my screen is in the wrong place. That's not very helpful. Okay. Meeting dates, Mark, anything unusual as we look at December and January?
Nothing unusual. December 9th is the next regular meeting, at which time we'll start circulating a draft 2026 calendar of meetings. In January, it'll likely start on the regular Tuesday, but by then it'll be published on the website on Zoom. So we'll take care of that in December.
Okay, any issues with the December date for commissioners who are present?
Not for me.
None for me. Good. Okay, I think we can take that as moving on with the currently scheduled date. No public hearings. So I don't see anyone here for public comment. I don't see anybody in the room who would be public comment. Just gonna wait a second here, but I don't believe we have any.
No, but no public present.
Okay. Well, with that, let's go to the report from our city council liaison, Councilmember Lebo, please.
Thank you. So the city council was addressing a bid biennium budget adjustment. Trying to think if there's anything that affects the planning commission, and it doesn't come to mind. But we are reviewing the climate element, and we had a very good discussion, gosh, was it last week?
Thursday. Yeah.
Thursday. So I think we are on track to approve it either this. Is it this Thursday? or next Thursday?
6 p.m. Thursday, the 20th.
Fine.
Special meeting.
So there were very few comments, and I think it's on track to for approval. Director Hoffman, do you have any additional comments?
There was much appreciation for you, the CPAT CAC.
Yes.
Not many changes, some questions. I will mark that the two, I don't know, they're not significant, but the two changes that I would call out the planning commission made to the parking. There was an inquiry as to why, but the consensus was, yeah, leave them struck. So those are not in the clean version going to council in the ordinance this Thursday night. So it stays the same.
So, tremendous effort by all that contributing this, and as Director Hoffman mentioned, a great appreciation for all the work that was done for it and the quality of the work that was achieved.
Any comments from commissioners on that topic or questions for council member?
Not me.
Okay, Councilmember Lebo, any other updates from council?
No, as I mentioned, we are doing the mid-biennium budget adjustment, but I don't recall anything related to the planning commission.
Okay, thank you.
Loosely adjacent. Loosely adjacent.
All right, so then we're on to old business. First item, continued discussion for potential development regulation amendments, minimum street frontage requirements, problem statements, framing amendment purposes, and I'll just, and I don't know if you had a chance to send these out, Mark. I knew I was on the hook to send out kind of a short and succinct version of kind of the argument for changing the frontage requirement. And I thank Councilmember Lebo for kind of recommending that we come up with sort of succinct explanation of why. I took a stab at that. Obviously, that's a proposal, so it's not blessed by the rest of the commission. I did send that out today. Mark, did you have a chance to send that out to the rest of the commission, or should I read through it, or how would you like to handle that?
No, I did. I combined 3 comment sets together, scanned them and emailed them, and then I have them here in paper. The 3 comments, 2 of them are from commissioners, Commissioner Larson, and then Yanni, your 2 documents together with the email. And then a public comment from a resident, Arthur Lockman, and I don't recall his address, but oh, here it is, 18409 29th Avenue, and he's speaking towards, well, I won't read it, but he's characterizing it as take a broad look at all standards, setbacks, etc., as opposed to just looking at street frontage. So those 3 comments are grouped together in your email.
Got it, and thank you. And I was in a work meeting all afternoon, so I have not seen the other comments. So I apologize for that, Commissioner Larson, and really want to thank the resident for submitting some comments. How would you like to proceed, Mark? Do we want to read through these? How would you like to discuss the comments that were submitted?
From my notes from the last meeting, and thank you for getting your material for the meeting, I was hoping that the focus could start off being what you brought to it. You know, the last 2 meetings we were expecting it. Now would be that opportunity.
Sure.
Then maybe Commissioner Larson, and then as that happens, we could read the paragraph from Art.
That's great. So I'll take that to say I'll just summarize what's in what I submitted today. What I submitted today was basically a succinct version of a proposal. And I attached to that the memo that I wrote back in February addressing this issue in more depth. And really my proposal for us to consider is fairly simple in that it is meant to, or it proposes to strike 3 pieces of the municipal code, 1816-040, 1818-040, and 1820-040, which for 3 of our zones in Lake Forest Park, the largest ones, so RS20, RS15, RS10. So for, if anyone's listening offline, these are minimum lot sizes of 20,000, 15,000, and 10,000 square feet. So there are biggest sort of minimum lot zones in the city. I propose that we strike the provision that requires that for any new lots created in those zones, each must have a 75-foot frontage along a public street right away. I don't need to go into all of the details. Those are laid out, I think, pretty well in my memo. But what I wanted to kind of bring forward are just three sort of succinct arguments for why we should do this. One is around a topic that we've all been working on quite a bit for the past few years, which is kind of housing supply. And, allowing lots to subdivide, per their zoning category increases housing availability over time, right? Doesn't force anything, but as people either sell or move away and whatnot, it allows people to subdivide lots without changing the baseline zoning. It's not really changing the neighborhood, right? It's not changing lots to a smaller size. It's allowing lots that are zoned in such a way as to be able to subdivide, to be able to do so without this, frankly, kind of an odd provision that was added in 1999, just months after the city annexed a bunch of neighborhoods that this provision affects. Second consideration to me is equity. And really here, what I mean is that with all the new state laws we've been wrestling with on the commission for the past few years, there's a mandate really to increase housing density in all zones, or all of these, what we used to call single family zones. And the odd result of this piece of code is that our very biggest lots will take less than their fair share of the burden of adding more units. So whether you see adding units as good or bad or indifferent, or you care about it in your neighborhood, the fact is that these pieces of code spread things unequally and inequitably, where the neighborhoods with the biggest, broadest, lots are essentially, there's an out. You could stop your neighbor from subdividing a lot because they have 149 feet of street frontage instead of 150. So to me, that is an equity issue. And third is fairness. And this is really fairness for the owner. So I want to distinguish between these two. The second one I just said is equity, kind of by neighborhood. This third one is fairness, which is that most, and I can say this truthfully for myself, for sure, is that when I was looking to buy a house here in Lake Forest Park, and many of us have experienced bidding wars and things happen really fast, we're not looking into the code for obscure provisions that might later prevent my ability to transfer my property wealth to my children or my spouse or whatever it is. And to me, I think this falls into that space, that only developers, and I don't say that with any negativity, I'm just saying people who are buying properties to make money off the properties and not live on them, they might be savvy enough to dig around all through the code and know how future value might be affected by other provisions in the code beyond the zoning. Most of us, we barely look at the zoning. We're just fighting to win a bid to buy a house that we love in a neighborhood that seems awesome. So to me, this notion that we have this piece of code that, from what I can tell, there's not an articulated public purpose for it, that we're essentially, in many cases, people are finding out when they actually want to offload their property. Let's say they have raised their kids and now they're ready to downsize, and they had assumed they could subdivide because they have a 1 acre parcel in a 20,000 square foot zone, to then have say, oh no, I'm sorry, you don't have 75 feet of frontage for each of your new parcels, so you have to stick with what you got. I feel like there's a certain unfairness to that. So those are three factors that I highlighted here. There are more expressed in the longer memo that I've reshared, but I didn't change it. It's the same memo I wrote back in February. So with that, that's my piece of this, and I would welcome questions or comments or differing perspectives, and then we can move on to also hear from Commissioner Larson and talk about the comment we got from the public. Cherie.
So so your proposal is to just remove it altogether and not put anything else in there, like 50 feet of frontage or 25 feet of front of, I mean, I don't see that 0 feet would be something that I would agree to.
No,
So,
thanks. That's a really good question. And I left it really simple, but there are plenty of other provisions that, for instance, things like you have to create lots that have access for emergency vehicles. So it's not as if you can just create a lot with, a 5 feet of frontage. There are other aspects of code, again, things like access for emergency vehicles, side yard setbacks. I'm not proposing to change any of that. So, like, for example, I'll just say that I have lots right next to me that were created before the city of Lake Forest Park annexed them. And there are a couple of sets of lots where there's basically a wide driveway. It looks like about 15 feet or 20 feet or so. I haven't measured it, but that actually goes to a second house in the back. They have enough width for emergency vehicles, all that stuff. I'm not proposing any changes to anything else in code. Like, okay, if your house is right up against that line, well, then you might have to add some side yard setback, right, to create the lot. This is just about getting rid of what is well, I'm sure the people who passed it wouldn't say it's arbitrary, but the public purpose of this provision is not clear, and it seems to only be about keeping the biggest lots big in Lake Forest Park. I'm not proposing to change anything else about safety, about setbacks, nothing else. Just get rid of this thing that just says 75 feet of public road frontage. That's it. But good question, because I've had that asked of me before, and it's like, yeah, I'm not proposing to replace it. I'm saying get rid of it because there are plenty of other pieces in code that regulate other aspects of lot development. And Mark, at any time, if I'm misstating anything about code, please jump in.
No misstatements or corrections, but I would add the difference between the larger lot zoning districts and the lower may be that the larger lot has minimum street frontage and the smaller lots have lot width. So it may be that if the proposal or a draft ordinance proposed getting rid of the street frontage, you would need to look at a minimum lot width requirement.
Good point. So we have different types of development standards governing different zoning districts. Again, at this point, I'm not proposing to change anything about that. So if there are other governing provisions that might hold in these situations, I'm not proposing anything different. All I'm proposing is to get rid of this piece of code that shows up 3 times and only in our sort of, I just tend to think of them as our biggest lot neighborhoods. So RS 20, 15, and 10. That's it. Other questions or thoughts?
I do.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
We have one in the room. I couldn't see who raised their hand.
John did.
Thanks.
I wanted to make a comment about the example that I saw, a good example with the overhead of the flag lot that was subdivided prior. And the one thing that Maddie, I saw your comments about the side setbacks, but what I saw in the overhead view is that it appeared that the driveways were right up next to the adjoining properties. buildings. And from what I understand, the setbacks, the side setbacks only pertain to structures, not driveways, right? And one of the things I was thinking about was, given our weather lately, with water runoff and drainage and so forth, if those driveways are impervious surfaces and they're that close to adjoining houses, is that so? That was my comment.
That's a good question. I might put this to Mark. I mean, those examples in that memo were land use decisions done when this was unincorporated King County. So it was those specific ones are from a neighborhood that was annexed in 98 or 99, and those subdivisions happened before that. So it may be that the rules were different, and I can't answer whether those were or not. Again, what I'm saying is I'm not proposing that we would change any requirements about setbacks, side yards, any of that. But Mark, is there something here that I'm missing or that is relevant to the point raised?
And then Commissioner Larson, I would just add that yes, it has a history. There were a set of rules. It met those set of rules. It was formed and then annexed. And so what we do here would apply to new proposals, new short plats, and so forth. And we can draw examples from other cities. We would likely need to start defining panhandle, flag lot, or setback from a panhandle, or minimum panhandle width. And so it starts to expand, whereas the task of just dealing with street frontage is very straightforward. But then for the commission and then later the council, the decision would be, what else is affected? What else would you like to address? How broad would you like to go?
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Larson.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks for putting the work into giving us something to look at relative to this request that you've been making. I have a couple of questions and a comment. One question is, gosh, I seem to recall at our last meeting or the meeting before last, something got brought up kind of as an aside about thinking, and I was thinking about this because of the note we got from a community member. There was something that you said, I think, Mark, about changing some of these codes that we needed to keep in mind, like and I think it was where they touch other parts of the code. And so I think what Cherie was saying is important for us to understand. It does seem like it won't be as simple as just removing the street frontage requirement, because there are other factors that aren't on these size lots that are on smaller lots that inform some of the siting. And so I just wonder if this is like phase one of the recommendation, and phase two is figuring out like what the downstream impacts are of it just being gone without a replacement proposal.
Yes, I would characterize it that way. It's very good at starting the conversation and directing which stone are you asking staff to go find, right? But before an ordinance is drafted and forwarded to council, the questions have to be asked. What are the intended or unintended consequences? Like Commissioner John said, is stormwater. So if flag panhandles have a minimum 10-foot width and it's fully paved, where's the stormwater going to go? Things like that. At a simple form, it may be that if street frontage requirement goes away and you bring in a relevant lot width requirement, that may be an ordinance. That may take care of the issue at hand, the first step. But no matter what, that lens will be applied. We'll do a thorough analysis as if we were in a pre-application meeting, because we do not want to find an unintended consequence after the ordinance is passed.
So Mark, a follow-up to that. I mean, just a reminder that this frontage thing only applies currently to 3 zones, and they are our least dense zones. So are there aspects of development regulations that are present in our smaller zones that don't apply in these zones? Because that seems to be the crux here. We seem to be talking about like slippery slope, unintended consequences, and yet this provision that we'd be pulling only affects the biggest lots where frankly John, just for the record, I mean, I'm an environmental scientist. I work on stormwater issues, salmon recovery, stream restoration, all that stuff. I'm just trying to understand why, if we have code language that applies in some of our 9600, 7200, whatever other zones, is that really absent in these large zones, Mark? Like, are we opening up something by, if we do what I suggest, are we opening up a risk that is really new and different in these zones, or is the rest of our code applicable across all zones?
Well, that search would need to be done, right? So if the consensus of the commission would be, we would like to explore this specific thing, staff would go away and do that research. Staff would go away and give you that feedback. That has not been done. We've been focusing on the singular issue so far. But what's clear is, in Art's letter, for instance, there are some basics. So it's not an expansion so much or a special look into it, but it could be, when we go away and look at this, that there is no minimum lot width requirement in the 3 big zones. And then you'd have to guess at why, right? But if you were to take away street frontage with no minimum lot width, you could not say, well, it exists in these 3 zones, so apply it here. You would either have to link it or expressly say it in those zones.
Maddie, you sound like you had a comment.
Yeah, well, I was just reading this since we're talking about it, and it does indicate that the minimum required width of a lot in the R 9.6 is 70 feet. So I think that I don't think anybody's saying like, oh, we shouldn't look at this. It's just because not all parcel sizes are treated the same way in the code. Like I said, I think this is a good first pass. But I think one of the things that Cherie sort of highlighted and Art's letter did is that we need to understand why this came into being. Like you said, it doesn't affect that many lots in our community. So the end value of like what it's going to affect in housing is not huge. And I understand that's, you're looking at it from an equity issue. And so any number maybe is meaningful. But until we can understand that, otherwise, what can, stop somebody from building, like 2, or subdividing into 2 really skinny lots that, are problematic because maybe there's also a critical area or whatever. Like if we're taking one lever away, but it doesn't have the backstop that other parcels like our 9.6 have, I think that's all we're saying. It's just like, let's take a minute and see, because if we're going to take away one lever on the big lots that doesn't exist for the small lots, we have to also look at what's being asked in small lots, but not big lots. And that's all. It's just being more thorough. It's not, I don't think the street frontage requirements, it seems like they're not attached to anything, but they kind of are, because every zone has been zoned a little differently. And so I think that's all we're saying. So maybe it's just a matter of identifying a little more homework, and whether the city does it or whether we do it as a commission, it's looking at like what are those other factors, and playing out some scenarios of what are some potential impacts for good or bad, and just thinking through it a little bit more. I think that's all that's being asked, Yanni.
Yeah, so two comments, and I appreciate that. First, I think this is a city staff question, and I will be making a motion to ask the city staff actually look at what are the code implications of doing this, because I feel like I've been raising this for a year and a half or so, and we seem to just kind of not really dig into it. So I will be raising a motion to direct city staff to look at this question. But I also want to address something that you said, which is I I don't at all think that this is a small thing affecting a few parcels. I mean, the memo that I wrote, I looked at two like fractions of neighborhoods. I looked at 98 parcels. And within those, this specific provision would eliminate the possibility of 25 more lots. That's not a minor thing affecting a few parcels.
Oh, I misunderstood. Sorry, I misunderstood your numbers. I thought you were
Oh.
you were looking at all of the 20,000 and 10,000 square foot lots.
No, I looked at 98 of them. I looked at one is my neighborhood because I know it pretty well. And the other is a neighborhood not far from here that's all 20,000. Mine is 15. And what's classic about the 20,000, you see this in several parts of Lake Forest Park, are these 1 acre lots that are 100 by 400 feet. It's really common pattern along some of these creek ravines. So what does that mean? Well, you have an acre plus lot. In some cases, sometimes it's just under an acre. Acre is 43,560, but 100 by 400. And because the lot's only 100 at the street, you can never subdivide it. And that really got my attention.
Yeah,
My
no, I get
neighborhood,
that.
it's not that is not as big of an issue, but it's certainly what was in this other one where almost every lot was affected by the frontage provision if you were to sort of imagine a homeowner wanting to subdivide. So I do want to ask staff to do the homework. Tell us how big an issue this is citywide. That's a GIS exercise that, you know, a solid GIS person could do at least to a fairly good level of accuracy. It wouldn't be perfect. I've worked with GIS enough to know that, okay, to do a fast analysis, it wouldn't be totally accurate, but it would be pretty darn good.
Yanni, we can't take action today, right? We don't have a quorum or
what do we got? What do we got,
No
Mark?
proposal. This is all discussion.
Okay.
yeah, it's just discussion. So we'll have to put a pin in it, I think, right? Anyway, till next time we meet.
Well, by put a pin in it, I'm not going to go draft an ordinance and go to council, right?
Right. I mean,
Oh, but
in
if I'm
terms of
asking the
directing.
staff to do something.
For direction, yeah. You know, with the attendees we have, you can give staff direction.
Great.
I see.
Great. So and again, I was in other work meetings. Could someone who has read the comments from the resident just summarize that for the record? And I apologize. I didn't have a chance to see that. So
It's
I'd like
pretty
to.
short. Do you want me to just read it? It's very short.
Please, I would appreciate it.
It says, while it's true that the R10, R15, and R20 zones contain street frontage requirements not in other residential zones, I noticed that the R9.6 and R7.2 zones contain lot width requirements that aren't contained in the R10, R15, and R20 zones. And he references the code where it says the minimum required lot in an R9.6 should be 70 feet, and the minimum required lot in an 7.2 shall be 60 feet. It says the maximum allowed impervious surface area is also less in the R15 and 20 zones than in other zones. And he says, I wonder if one or more of these differences might inform the reasoning behind the street frontage provisions in the lower density zones. It seems they should be researched and taken into account in making a recommendation to the council regarding street frontage requirements. It also seems that development regulation changes should be evaluated thoughtfully and carefully after considering all relevant matters, including the purposes of specific zoning requirements, the potential consequences of proposed changes, including environmental and public works impacts, and the legislatively mandated need for higher densities, the availability of the unit lot subdivision process, and basic fairness and consistency across the zones and the city as a whole. So he was just asking us to do exactly what we're talking about, is, you know, to really dig in and not oversimplify this, and just take that thoughtful approach of thinking about, all right, like you said, how many lots are impacted? What are the net effects of that? And then trying to just tease out some of the considerations here. So
Well, I really appreciate the thoughtful comment, and would like to thank that resident for submitting that. That really is that's what we'd like to have, is people provide thoughtful comments like that. Um, I do. I mean, I'll just reiterate then that I would like to ask the commission to support a request of staff to start digging into the details of this so that we can understand it, because I feel like that it's been raised now over a lot of time. We were very busy last year with both middle housing, climate element. This has been on kind of the waiting list, and I think it's time. And I would love to know the answers to exactly what is being asked by the resident and things you've raised, Maddie. I just feel like with all the work we've done around thinking about middle housing and how do we make, both how do we comply with state law, but also how do we sort of address Lake Forest Park's role in housing and in providing for our residents who are, aging out of their, big rambler homes on big lots. I think we need to do this homework. So I would like to ask staff to initiate that, and maybe by next time, Mark, you could give us just a timeline, like what's it going to take. I'm not trying to say, okay, Mark, we want all the answers by next time, but given your resources and other things on your plate, when could we have an analysis completed that gets at both how big is this issue, and that, to me, again, I think that's a GIS question. It'll be close enough.
I have some feedback. Let's start with GIS.
Please.
We do not have GIS experience in this building, or expertise, or a resource, flat out. But we have other tools. In order to make up for that, we look at existing data. What we just adopted in the comprehensive plan and what we have in our permit tracking can get us numbers of lots zoned X, right? And we can do site-specific analysis for any theoretical or actual site in the city. What I don't want to do is have to go out and argue again for a GIS resource, or wait for one, or even need one. But I could frame it that way. It won't be so detailed that you'll have the certainty of how many specific lots will this affect. And I don't think you want to get there, because that doesn't even take into account critical areas, trees, and any
Sure.
number of other non-number criteria. But I can get there. Now, the other part's even easier. We can look at the development standard implications of this scenario, right? By looking at lot width and so forth in comparison to lot frontage. We can bring that out in your December meeting, because what it says is, if a lot width minimum is added to these three zones, but you do away with street frontage, it adds that flexibility. You could have two lots that are facing the street at whatever lot width, but what it doesn't address is all the flag and panhandle scenarios. So that's a good first step, right? If the original task is identified as what's the meaning of street frontage, what are the implications in code, and what's needed to implement that, that's pretty straightforward. But the commission will need to decide, does that get you far enough into flexibility? Would you like to then look at panhandle or flag? That we could bring back in January.
So first of all, I really appreciate your response, and I'd say that what you said, the second part, not the GIS, but looking at the implications of the development code, I think frankly that's maybe the most important part. What I do know, though, having worked in the public sector for a long time, is that our elected officials usually want to know, how big of an issue is this? And I'm a little bit concerned that if we can't get some kind of, I'll just say, gross analysis just based on GIS, for example, that we can't answer the question that council will ask, which is, well, how big a deal is this? We have my little, analysis of a few neighborhoods. I mean, I thought I did a pretty good job. I spent, a handful of hours on it, but, that doesn't tell us the whole deal. So I guess I would ask our council liaison, how, uh, would you feel like the council needs to know how many parcels are potentially implicated by this? And if that is important, then I guess my question to staff is like, does the city really not have any, say, on-call contracts they could pull on to get someone to do this GIS analysis?
Do not. I've been trying for 2 years.
Okay.
My method would be opening King County Parcel Viewer and going square by square by square. That's going to take me months.
That's what I did. It only took me hours, man. It only took me hours.
Because then I have to consider what am I saying? What environmental condition exists on the lot that we're precluded from being subdivided into anything? Or does it need an RUE, even if it's 5 acres? So to get to that level of detail, I would have to do a lot by lot analysis of everything in every particular zone. And I don't have that.
Well, just to be clear, Mark, that is not what I'm asking for. Okay.
Okay.
What I'm saying is kind of the simple first order analysis of just based on zoning and frontage, how many parcels may be implicated by this. That's what I did in my little analysis that I wrote up. I acknowledge that there may be other factors that prevent subdivision. So that's fine. But
Yeah,
are we talking about, are we talking about 50, or are we talking about 300? Like, what are we talking about? And I'd love to hear from our council liaison about kind of what, just in your experience, what it would take for the council to take an interest in this. And do we need to show, kind of that this is a big deal versus a small deal, or something in terms of the properties that it implicates?
If I might, so the council would be interested in, to your question, how many of the lots are affected, and ideally, is there a map showing the lots that would be affected? We do have zoning maps that show the parcel sizes.
That's where, what level of detail or accuracy do you want? What I have is a map that says this X number of lots are zoned 10,000, this number zoned 15,000. But then you go through easements, flags, everything divided since 1906. That's parcel by parcel. If you want that number to be accurate, it has to be done. A GIS person could do it. I don't have one.
But I think for council, it'd be more trying to understand, look at a map of Lake Forest Park and say, I understand that these are R10, R15, R20. And how many of those are there?
And that we have.
Because then you can see, which is the areas of Lake Forest Park that are most affected, and you can see the relationship to streams or other critical area implications, whether they be topography or wetlands or streams. So, I mean, then you could say, well, there are 50 lots in Lake Forest Park that might be affected by this, or there are 300 lots that are affected by this, and you can see that most of them are in this area. But knowing whether or not there can actually be subdivided because of critical areas is less of an issue, because you would say that those still apply.
Yeah, and I appreciate your perspective, and I will reiterate, and I've said this in the context of various other topics, that I am not personally interested at all in, rolling back or anything like that regarding our environmental protections we have in place. That's what I do day to day. So my point is, let's get a working estimate of the scale of this specific issue as a first step to looking at, okay, I fully acknowledge it might implicate other aspects of our code to get rid of this one. I just see this one as having so far I've heard no evidence of a public purpose. I can imagine what some of the ideas were when it was passed, but let's get down to the bottom of it. Let's fix it. Whether it's to get rid of it and then add some other things, or understand why this is somehow a public benefit, then great. But so far, haven't heard any of that. Commissioner Larson.
Yeah, hey, I just wanted to say as chair, I think it might be advisable that we move on because we've spent a lot of time on this topic, so we need some sort of action. And I have heard Mark say that we don't have that expertise. I still feel like that's something that maybe a small community working group, we've got a lot of talent here in the city, and I think that this is the kind of thing where we need to do probably more work on our own. I don't think we can ask the city at this point. There's not enough critical mass to take the limited resources and then skills they don't have. So I would love to ask that we make a decision on where do we go from here and then move our meeting into some of our other topics. I just think that we're kind of beating a dead horse right now.
I'm game for that. Mark, you suggested that looking at sort of the more desktop, looking at implications for other aspects of code is something that's doable. If you could tell us what you think might be a fair timeline with everything that's on your plate, then I'd be happy to have you bring that back to us before we decide on deeper dives on this.
I really think I can at least put guardrails or parameters around it, maybe a little broader than we eventually need to get for the December meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyone have an objection to that? I mean, I think I'm making a request here for staff to spend some time. Anyone have an objection to that? And I'm totally open that this might, then lead to some working group of a small group of us, but I think this is a reasonable thing to ask of staff.
I guess I just always approach it with like the staff has very little time, and Mark has said he doesn't have a lot of expertise. So my first preference would be that like we form a group or put a call out to some folks in our community that have this expertise.
We don't even
at
have
the
a license, let alone my ability to go in and not break it. But I do have I do have access to existing data. So let me start.
Yeah. If you're saying this isn't a lift for you and you can do it that quick, I think that's great. I did also want to just say for the good of the whole that if we have that information, I just also wanted to put out there that this might be another one of those components of our code that we use as leverage for incentivizing the kinds of housing we want, particularly given the nature that I'm going to guess based on our zoning map, that a lot of these parcels do implicate critical area, and they might also be really great parcels for housing developments that would be ideal for building, more diversity in our housing inventory. And so I just want to ask everybody to consider that we don't necessarily have to lift the code as much as maybe put it in as an incentive that this requirement could be modified or lifted if a person was willing to build some 800 or 1200 square foot houses versus just a bunch of really large houses.
Well, thank you for that. And I think we should always have our ears and ideas open for ways to incentivize things. So I don't disagree with that statement at all. Mark, so I guess I would say I appreciate if you can bring back what you can in December, and then let's have I'd love to at that point talk about, should we form a working group to take some pressure off of staff? Can we clarify the questions that such a working group would wrestle? I mean, I'm certainly willing to be part of something like that. And I think some of these questions are best answered by city staff who have access to the data. So I thank you for, unless I hear objections, I'm asking you to do what you can by December so we can kind of take a look at what we're dealing with here. and identify next steps, and then I'm happy to move on to other agenda items.
Yeah, no, I would be happy to. That's perfect.
Great. Any other comments, questions from commissioners or liaison? Okay, let's move on.
No, Cherie has
sorry.
her hand
Oh,
up.
sorry. I didn't see the hand. I was looking at the agenda. Thanks, Cherie. Go ahead.
Do we need to make a motion to put this on the table until December? Are we good?
Good question, Mark. As a matter of sort of practice here, do we need a motion to ask you to do that analysis?
I don't think so. Normally, I would be
Okay.
saying, yes, please do give me direction, but given who's in attendance and so forth, I think it's pretty clear. And it's more a discussion of where do we go from here on the next agenda than it is policy or, a recommendation. I'm comfortable.
Okay.
I think I got it.
Okay, and thank you, Cherie. I appreciate you paying attention to kind of protocol here. Didn't want to go outside of that. So let's move on to our next item. And so this is discussion on questions regarding development community and affordable housing community guests invited to provide feedback to the Planning Commission. So Mark, I'm going to punt this to you to clarify what you're hoping for from this discussion tonight.
Yeah, Yanni, really quick, I think Mark said that we could also bring the document that I had sent in, at least have me introduce it and ask everyone to take time to read it later.
Please.
Oh, yeah. So if you guys look in the material that Mark had sent, you'll see that I laid out just a memo to you. You'll recall that in companionship with street frontage and very likely work we need to be doing on our ADU code, given the new laws that have been put in play. One of the other items I wanted to put on the table was revisiting our residential side yard setback requirements. And what I've laid out is a little background, just to remind everybody that right now we have a combined requirement of 15 feet in total between each side yard, with not any less than 5 feet on one side. And then I put together kind of for me what I see as a problem statement based on some development that we've seen in our neighboring communities as well as our own, which are really just 3 key points. I think that our current side yard code requirements really risk overcrowding and loss of privacy between parcels, between people's property. I also think that there are construction and maintenance conflicts that exist when you have structures that are built within 5 feet, or at as close as 5 feet to a property line. And I just think that there's also some issues with scale and visual impact. And this really has to do with this ability to go up 2 or 3 stories with unlimited length down a property line. So if I want to build on 5 feet off of my property line on my neighbor's property line, there's nothing constraining the length of my building in that scenario. And if I'm going up to the full maximum height, it can be a very daunting situation. And as we move into new building structures that might include duplexes, that just exacerbates that, in that we can have these sort of sheer walls right at one another's property lines. So that's what I mean by incompatible scale and visual impact. And what I've done in that is to encourage us to consider proposed action. And I laid it out just as I just took our existing code and tried to modify it to put a starting place for a conversation on board. And then I gave you some sort of rationale for the requested change, and that is that we consider not necessarily taking anything away from current property owners by reducing the 15-foot requirement, but requiring that there be at least 7.5 feet on each side instead of splitting that. I also am making a recommendation that we limit the run of a structure down a property line to 25 feet. That doesn't exist in our code today. And also asking that where a property isn't at least, let's see what I had put. If a property is as close as 7.5 feet to the side, to the property yard, to the side yard, that we require those second and third stories to be stepped back to help reduce some of that visual impact. And so, everything that I've recommended under the proposed action is really in response to that background material and with the idea of any new construction in our community allows that new neighbor, who often isn't the builder of the property, to ensure that they're being a good neighbor right out of the gate and not simply prioritizing like maximizing envelope at the expense of sort of disrupting, like I said, maintenance, construction issues, privacy issues, overcrowding, like not leaving any room for greenery, and to John's point earlier, having those buffers for runoff. So anyway, that's all. I'm glad to answer any questions, but I would just ask if you guys can look at that, and that as we continue to have these conversations about changes that we're looking for in our existing code, that we continue to consider this at your pleasure.
Now, I'll need your permission, because the email chain with the chair, Sam, and you has 2 points in time with two entirely different versions. The one that I included in this scan is the simplified, more of a problem statement. It doesn't include the other things you mentioned. So what I could do is go back in that chain, make sure that that second, more detailed portion, I could print that out, add it, and then you'll have a more complete view. For instance, the page that we have in the scan that you have doesn't include the 7.5 feet balance. But I have that in my email chain with the chair because that chain is frankly 2 to 3 months old.
That the one I'm looking at that you sent out today does have that 7.5 feet. Yeah, and the only thing that was different really in that was that change from 5 feet to 7.5 feet. The document should be the same. The one I sent you about a month ago, when I first introduced this to you and Sam, I realized I had not taken care of that component part. So that was my edit. So we shouldn't have a version issue if you're just using the one I sent you yesterday. I don't believe.
And I take it, I do. I have a series of printed documents that I thought were accurate according to the scan, so I'm going to recycle these. And I do have yours, which has a page 2 that has that analysis.
Okay, thank you. Phew, I was going to scour my email and see what I did wrong. Yeah, I just had updated that because I figured as a starting point to our conversation, it should be consistent. So yeah, what you have, commissioners, is the language I'd love to start our conversation with if you're willing.
Yeah. So again, I missed the last meeting, so I may have missed a piece of this. I just want to say I really appreciate the analysis, and I know I've spoken with you about some of these specific issues before, and I think they're extremely relevant, extremely important for us to talk about. I guess my question for staff is, okay, we have this write-up that's really helpful. Is this fodder for us to schedule a specific discussion about these changes down the road? Is there anything we can do now other than to encourage our fellow commissioners, including me, because I kind of missed things last month, to read it in detail and be prepared to discuss it, and we schedule a discussion for next time? Or how should we move here, Mark?
If it were staff's preference, we would have more than just a quorum, and we would get very specific direction from the whole commission in December.
Okay.
And so it's merely a factor of it's not comfortable to proceed forward with half the commission, and we have vacancies. But that's my only apprehension. I think the way it's been discussed all along and put in the parking lot and the work plan, if it's the commission's consensus to examine this issue and make a recommendation specific to it and bring it forward, I think we can. If December we have that full group, or more than just a quorum, that could be it, or January.
Okay. So I guess my request, and I know we're normally on a schedule where we really don't get much in the way of communication until just days before the next meeting. It sounds to me like in this case, it would be great if staff were to send whatever the correct version of the write-up. Let's make sure we get that right. To commission, you know, quickly, and really encouraging us to take the time to read through it and be ready to discuss it thoroughly. Beginning in December, it might take to the next meeting, but I really appreciate Commissioner Larson's effort to put this in front of us, and we'll do my part to read it carefully. But
And you do have the right version, Yanni. Sorry, I thought I made that clear. You have the right
okay,
version.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think for the notes, I would love to see, to your question about when we would pick this up, when we come to old business next month, I would very much love each of us to come to the table ready to maybe do a little legwork on our own, read and become familiar with things that might be in your head right now about street frontage, questions you have about side yards as outlined here. I really want to encourage all of us to look at what our ADU code says. I think that there are things that really warrant us reviewing what we've done there. As I mentioned before, we did not consider those units as being separate and sellable separately when it came to citing them on a property. And I think we really need to consider that, because I don't know, Mark, how your team is going to handle if somebody says, I want to sell my ADU in the backyard and it doesn't have the street frontage, it doesn't have the egress or access. So I think in terms of making sure that we're not limiting development in our community in a way that's punitive for people, we really do need to make sure that, and those are the only things I can think of, is what you've brought up, Yanni, the side yards and ADUs. But for everyone else, like, let's think about this. What are some other things in our base code that are going to be impacted by these new development requirements, and get that housekeeping done.
Thank you. And I do confirm, I think I know what the problem is. The scanned PDF version I emailed to you has all 3 pages from Maddie. It's accurate. So use that. I must have done the settings and printed every other page. But it's a perfect break. What you're missing is page 2. So it's confirmed. So that's where we'll start, and then we'll go to December and January.
Okay. Sounds good. Again, thank you for the work that you did there, Maddie. Let me just move us back to, I think, the agenda topic, which is about this discussion on questions regarding development community and affordable housing community guests invited to provide feedback. And I'll just say, first of all, that and I've been advocating for this, and I missed the last meeting. So where does our kind of planning stand on that in terms of timing? And so please fill us in, Mark, for not just for people like me who missed the last meeting, but also for any community members who may listen to this. So what's the plan?
Thank you. For this item, affordability tools, it's in your parking lot. It's more of a 2026 item. But the hurdle was, who do we invite? As I'm inviting them, and they express they're glad to attend by Zoom or whatever, what am I going to talk about? And the 2 communities, more or less, are the development community and the affordable housing community, right? They bring that expertise, but very few people are going to come here for a general conversation about what's in the code. They haven't read it. So what we're searching for is a set of questions that we could ask or tailor to those 2 groups that identify that if they're willing to come and talk, what are they going to be responsible for? And Chair Kasnick gave a first attempt, I believe, at the last meeting. So we have a draft, but I would say it's a function of where do you want to end up in January, February, as you get through your work plan item in November, or 2026 work plan is on the agenda tonight and December. If we start that effort in January, February, I intend to bring guests to attend remotely, but start having a conversation and inform the commission. I have people in mind, but I'm not able to specifically ask them for a specific night or anything because other than, hey, come talk to us about affordable housing, it's pretty broad. So chair was going to take a first attempt at what those focusing questions could be that would enable us to go out and locate volunteers to come speak to you. Given that the last meeting to this very minute, I have not had a moment of time to myself. I have not done any work or thought on that and are not likely to between now and December 9th. But what I can do is leave it on the agenda, talk with the chair, see if he is going to be available in December, then have this discussion about those draft questions, see if they're sufficient, see if you want to round them out, and then begin inviting. It takes some time. With the holidays, it's not likely that there's going to be a lot of availability, but if we start early and aim for January, February, I think it's highly likely.
Thanks for that. I think that sounds great. And again, I apologize if I'm treading over anything that was discussed last time. To me, I mean, I think these are kind of two different sets of questions, right? One around kind of the development community and thinking about different types of housing. And my brain goes immediately to, okay, if we wanted to incentivize some smaller scale detached housing like cottage or whatever, kind of what's the math for a developer? What would we need to put in our code to incentivize that as an option instead of kind of the minimums that we've done through the middle housing? To me, the questions for kind of the capital A affordable housing they're just different questions and different people. So I don't know how Sam was thinking about this, but I think these are different conversations, different invitations, different questions, both of which are really important and really, I think, something that we should get our head around. So I mean, I'm happy to discuss either or both, but I think these are two different kind of focus areas for us to dig into.
I'd like to make a comment. I agree that I think they are, different. Capital A affordability and lowercase affordability. But to me, in terms of moving into this topic, what would be really helpful is some context setting. And that is more definitive information about what our goals are. And I understand our goals generally are, housing is not affordable. We want more affordable housing. We need to allow for growth, so we need more housing. But the question is, what is affordable and how much growth are we talking about? And I believe that we have targets in Puget Sound Regional Council for growth. Just knowing what these goals are in terms of understanding specifics would be helpful, and hopefully we'll be able to develop some metrics to understand whether we're meeting those goals. But I think it informs the conversation about our incentives and what we're doing to meet those goals. So
now, fortunately, a lot of that's in our housing element, hot off the presses, right? And so that's a recent effort that's fine-tuned, has the growth targets for the countywide planning policies and formats. But an important distinction was that was an effort to meet the Growth Management Act. And the Planning Commission and everyone involved was pretty clear that let's do the mandates and then spend time in our next work plan to see what tools before we exceed the regional guidelines. I don't want to call them minimums by any means. But if there is a benefit that can be captured for affordability and it's called a tool, let's explore it. And so those made it into the parking lot based on the growth targets and likely development.
Yeah, I would just add that, I mean, I agree with that sentiment in that I feel like what the targets that we were sort of allocated, I think there's a little, they don't necessarily get at the questions that I've at least heard from community and that have been raised here in the commission, like things like the incentives for just smaller scale detached housing. That's not popping out of the Growth Management Act, or sorry, from that perspective as something that, oh, thou shalt do. So I don't think we're going to find a target there. We'll find targets around, very, very low income housing. We'll find some targets for other aspects that are a little different. But I think what was in the parking lot was, in my recollection at least, and from hearing from many community members, were things like, okay, so what about how we, as we age and want to stay in Lake Forest Park, but there's nothing here that's the size that we would like to live in and would like to be able to afford. So to me, I'm not sure the targets are going to speak to that. I think it's more of a, community conversation. Some of our, I mean, I think of this as an advantage in some ways. Some of our surrounding cities, including Seattle, um, have had more mandates on them. So they have had to, already move forward with different types of housing models to create more, both different combinations of ADUs and other things. And I feel like we can look to some of our neighbors who maybe had to do it or at least felt compelled to do it, and let's see if those match up with what we're hearing from community. Or do we need to go ask our community more questions? So I think, I'm not sure that knowing just being responsive to the state mandated or the countywide, what are the countywide policies growth.
The acronym is memorable. Countywide planning policies. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh God. Yeah. Good stuff. Maddie, I'm not hearing you right now. I see your mouth moving, but I'm not.
Oh, I was saying, John, did you get your question answered?
Well, I do want to say that my question was not just with respect to targets, regional targets that are imposed on us, but more about our own goals in the city and for the residents of the city. What are we trying to achieve? And, for example, in terms of affordability, maybe it's reasonable to think somebody who works over at Safeway should be able to live in Lake Forest Park. And so how much do they make at Safeway? And what can they afford at Lake Forest Park? And how do we get to that point? So I think some of it is expressing our own, goals. So not just.
John, I just wanted to offer that quite some time ago, we had done a survey, and I think one of the things that bubbled up, well, I hope one thing we can all agree on is that there are just certain levers we can't control in our community. And I don't know, like, I feel like we can only take affordability so far. But one lever we do have is by having a diversity of housing sizes, like square footage, since rent and sales prices are based very often as a basis, like on square foot. And I think with throughout the region, we're seeing smaller homes, 800, 1,200 square foot homes, sort of being replaced by 2,000 plus square foot homes. But we have heard that there is a desire for folks to be able to age in place, to have some single level living, for new homeowners, or smaller families to have places to come in that are a little more modest. And so I think that's what I've always operated off of, is that this need in the community for inventory that doesn't just favor, 2,000 to 4,000 square foot homes. Nothing wrong with that. That's for a certain economic level and a certain family type. And so I don't know if that helps with your question, but I think that is the goal, and the recognition is that diversity of housing sizes can also then provide a more accessible entry point for people who might be making less than the person who's living in a 4,000 square foot house. And so, but I don't know that we can crack the big A of affordability where we can't really control the underlying cost of land.
I can work with you. With our new comprehensive plan adopted last December, is Growth Management Act compliant because we are required to plan for all segments, right? And emergency housing and so forth. So we have volume 1 is the goals and policies, very fresh, and then volume 2 data. And I'll work with you and show you what that kind of baseline is. Get a really good understanding because that was a year of effort.
Okay.
And I don't want to recreate that, or have you recreate it, but I think that can get that kind of start that would inform this process.
Great.
Thanks for bringing that to the surface, John. I always appreciate that reminder when we're talking like this.
Agreed. So
I guess if Sam has a set of draft questions, I'll refresh those, see where we're at, talk with him, and bring this to December, hopefully in hopes of discussing or reviewing draft questions.
I think that would be great with a target of, trying to get maybe our first visitors in January or February. I mean, I think we want to do this right, get our questions right, and then provide an opportunity to recruit some guests to show up.
Yeah.
I think that'd be really interesting and really valuable because these are complicated questions with a lot of kind of sort of spin-off issues we'll need to consider as we hear it. But let's start. Some of these we've been talking about for a while. Maddie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mark, I know that ultimately it's the responsibility of you and Chair Sam. I was going to say Klassen, and that's not Klassen. Kasich. That it's up to you guys to kind of prepare for that. But if there were time in the schedule, it might be nice if we could each receive it by email, just to maybe weigh in, like with a couple of editorial comments and or maybe questions that we would love for you and Sam to consider as you prepare that final list, if that's possible, versus taking up time in our meeting to like hash out what our questions should be. I'm comfortable with you and Sam deciding what they are, but it would be nice to have a little input.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We do have people in mind. I would like more, and I'd like more questions, no doubt. The two problems that primarily need to be addressed is if we're going to talk to the development community about what they need to know the priorities of Lake Forest Park. It can't be, well, I need cheap land or free land, small, et cetera, et cetera. They need to realize critical areas of trees. Otherwise, that information is not of much use. I have people in mind from the affordable housing community, but that topic is so broad and they don't necessarily have time to read our comprehensive plan and prepare and do a specific thing, but they definitely have that expertise. So it's just fine tuning to allow them to understand why we're asking them.
So, Mark, is it appropriate? Like I have some on the first one on kind of the residential developer community, whatever. I mean, I have a few names in mind of people who I happen to know. Is it okay for me to send those your way, or like I don't want to, these are just people I know who I've talked to about this type of topic, but how do you
That's
want
the
to do this?
planning commission. You guys are the community. You have the eyes and ears and the
Okay.
expertise. I work here, but I say that in the context of if you have or can make an introduction or a suggestion and go that far and are comfortable that they have that awareness to your level of comfort, absolutely. And then
Okay.
logistics.
Okay. Then I think I have a few names in mind who are local people who work in this area that, seem thoughtful to me. So I'll send a few names your way, but I up to you whether to tap them or not.
I just can't weigh whether they're going to skew the argument and their feedback's going to be of value to you.
You know what? I'm going to assume that every one of them will skew it a little bit one way or the other, and it's our job to listen to it and take the best of what they've got to say and share. I mean, that's just realistic.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the request from Maddie was that maybe with a little bit of lead time, if we could see some of these draft questions that Sam has proposed, that we could maybe just provide some input on, and then we don't have to wrestle them to death at the next meeting, but we could just say, yep, these sound good, or maybe add this one question. And you're welcoming some suggestions for names, and I'll just send those to you directly with a CC to chair, and any other commissioners welcome to do that. It's not always easy to get people to sign up to show up for a meeting like this and talk with us, but hopefully we'll get some good voices. Did I miss anything else? Is that what we're doing next on this topic? Sound all right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to take us on to new business, and the first one is 2026 work plan. Mark, tell us where we're at on that.
The last 3 pages of your packet is the 2025 work plan and the extended parking lot that captures not all possibilities, but the priority possibilities to prioritize. And so that's the starting point. The way it stands now, likely these will go to council in February. So we have this meeting to begin the conversation, start fleshing it out in December to understand them, maybe finalize it in January, and then transmit it to council for their consideration. I would offer, we do not have the bandwidth for all of them. But it is exhaustive. So in that sense, as you look at them and staff talks about, by the way, we also have a shoreline master program update. By the way, we also have a critical areas ordinance mandate. But this really is your tool, what you intend to work on last year. I thought I would start with some optimism and look at the 2025 plan with you and show or demonstrate how easy it is to show how far you've gotten. Obviously, the comp plan was done. Then you took on middle housing in the beginning of the year. That was successful. We met those mandates. Then the climate element from the CPAT. And you've already started discussion on item 3, which was 30% of your work plan as time permits. So we're not all the way through item 3 for 2025, but the expectation was we didn't have to be. So I think it's a good example to portray going into next year of how much work the Planning Commission has done.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. I kind of looked at it the same way. I'm like, I feel like we pretty much got 1 and 2 pretty much done, and the third one is still we have plenty of stuff there that's in our parking lot. So I guess my question for you is what would be a good outcome from tonight's discussion? Are you looking for some input on prioritizing some of those things? We've talked about a few things today that seem like we want to move those up or get some traction, more on the frontage thing, having staff analysis on that, having what Maddie has laid out for us in her memo. I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the best use of our time tonight with our limited attendance, but still to give us some direction as we shape up this work plan for next year.
Well, for me, any feedback is valuable. I know what my wish list or marching orders are. I know that my budget is, but I intended it solely just to begin to get an idea of what you really want to focus on next year. The difference being that the major efforts we just finished were professional service agreements and grants. We tried to look at other issues as time permitted, but there really wasn't an opportunity to add other items. They weren't part of the contracts. We had to stick to the effort. Those are done. Now these are time sensitive only as a priority of how fast you want to move. how urgent are they? And so I really look at it as an opportunity to be productive next year. I know that we're going to have to do another comprehensive plan amendment of some sort. This time it's not so major that it's one topic. It's not climate, right? It can be two or three things. Those are listed. For instance, to gain Puget Sound Regional Council full certification, we'll have to address 4 specific items in the comprehensive plan related to transportation. That gives us an opportunity to look at the comments from the King County Affordable Housing Commission that were not mandates, but they were voluntary, but could be made implementation items as was discussed last year. We could look at, in that same effort, adding a full implementation chapter that prioritizes short, medium, and long term, or incorporates some of the climate action plan items and prioritizes them. So the opportunity is there, but I see it as we will be doing a 3rd year of comprehensive plan amendment. I would like it to be one bucket. We have the opportunity to do multiple things in there, but only based on the bandwidth. I don't have a team, so I love it when a team is mentioned. My team is tasked with very specific things. None of them are on this list. So that's my outlook. Development code is a similar bucket. We can do a series of related development code amendments, right? Or separate ordinances, but take a look without getting too broad. But what competes with that is that the city clearly missed the last round of shoreline management plan updates. The next round is in 2 years. I would suggest we start aiming for that. Critical area ordinance for small cities was a challenge. It was mandated to be before December 2024, along with the comprehensive plan. There was no bandwidth. Even medium-sized cities had no bandwidth. It's understood. There's very little downside, but do we have to do it? Yes. And we can get there. So as we talk about all these parking lot items and the feedback that we get of what's important to the community and you, and populate that list, staff is interested in making sure that we also make progress on the other items in 2026 or 2027. A small city is hardly ever fully in compliance with each and every bit of legislation or mandate, but we are striving to be there. So we're well underway with the climate element. We're 4 years early with the periodic update of the comp plan. We were right on time with middle housing. We were on time to the day. So those heavy lifts are over. When staff takes a break and comes back after Christmas, it's time to then have another productive year. I look at your work plan and how you project it to council as what would be considered a priority and productive.
So I guess the thing I struggle with a little bit here is that, I see all these things on the list and they're all really good and they all kind of, yes, we've talked about those. We need to move on those. I have trouble keeping straight these things that we sort of need to do. Some of the ones you just mentioned that are kind of due within a year or 2 years. And I just wonder if there would be a way to show kind of either, visually or, table wise so that we could, what I see that we could do is that we could, put effort into some of these things that have a bit of a runway, but we need to start on them, but then also pick at some of these ones that have kind of come up from our discussions as priorities, like the ones we talked about earlier tonight, and moving those forward. But I'm having trouble just visualizing some of these things that, you see as, hey, we're going to need to do this. And by date X, and I don't have a good sense of which ones those are. Maybe I'm the only one, but I'm just having trouble kind of thinking about how to take this list and prioritize it in a way that reflects both kind of mandates and expectations from the state or things that maybe the city council has identified, and then some of these more particular things that have really come up from us as a commission. So I don't know if you could help us, by next time or something to do that, or how anybody else have a feel for that? I see a list of really good things to do and I struggle with figuring out what to do next.
Well, I have them in 4 buckets right now. They're different than the mandates we just went through. And they're all urgent. And so if we prioritize the 4 buckets, we're likely to come up with 10 number one priorities. We're not going to meet them all. But budget's coming, that discussion's there. We only have so much budget. We don't have a grant to play with anymore. So in that context, in this work plan and then staff's draft and then talking with you, we can prepare for that council moment where they look at your work plan and also start preparing for the next budget, right? In those discussions. So it goes hand in hand. If I craft these 4 buckets into kind of a draft 2026 work plan, but honestly give it to you with, we can't possibly do this much this year, and then start to have those individual conversations, I think we can get there in December and January.
Maddie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Mark, I think that's going to be important is just for us to, see what's on your mind. Like, here's all the stuff we actually really need to do, and I don't think we have time to do it. I mean, I think if you can make that visible for us, I think that's super helpful. And then I think we also need to take a pretty disciplined approach in our upcoming meetings. I feel like getting really serious about our agendas and staying really tight on our discussion times, I think might help us fit more in than what you might think we could do if we just exercised a little more discipline and took some of our work offline. I mean, some of this might be able to be helpful by us taking on some homework assignments or scheduling a few key, extra meetings. So I just don't want you to feel like, we're upside down and it's unsolvable, Mark. I do think that there are some things we can do, and the commission does have a history of being willing to step up and do extra work where needed. So I did want to offer that.
I have no problem with that as long as the work is done transparently in a meeting, on behalf of the city. But there is no team, right? And so my day is spent putting out fires, issuing permits, doing code enforcement, going on inspections, playing with right-of-way permits. Oftentimes I do this work at night or on weekends. So I know the bandwidth issue, and that's where the prioritization comes in so that I can block off times and focus on that.
Yeah.
I'm willing to accept outside work, but I don't have the time to administer it all day. And so it really is independent, and then it needs to be brought back to the full commission because the consensus of the commission that matters to staff. So within that context, I'll accept any assistance or work that's possible, but
I don't know. What do you think, John or Cherie?
Well, I've already been on record as volunteering to help provide additional support, and I'm happy to do that. And if it's participating in some subgroup and or in any way, I'm certainly stand ready.
And that works for staff because then the subgroup comes back with their discussion or work and informs the consensus of the commission. Now they couldn't have a quorum, but I don't think that's what's being asked. But to do that kind of thoughtful work and then bring it back to the commission for consideration, I think that works.
I'm kind of thinking this is where, I feel like a couple of us could, agree as like homework. We definitely want things transparent, but where we can do a little legwork. I actually felt pretty excited whether or not we do anything with the side yard piece. It was fun to just sink my teeth into something and feel like I had the ability to say, okay, here's where we can start our discussion, and it's got enough specificity, almost like a motion. And I feel like if we could identify a few things and each of us be willing, I mean, like John has expressed, to do some legwork and bring back to our fellow commissioners, like, okay, I've done some thinking about with, John, you and I could sit down. We've done some thinking together about X and present it to the group. And Yanni, you've done some thinking about Y. And it may allow us to plow through some of this versus the slower drip it takes sometimes when we do round robin in a meeting. Um, so um, anyway, just something for us to consider as we look at a tall order of tasks that really need our attention.
Well, I
So
think just being able to prioritize stuff is really important. Just knowing, what we need to start with and then go down the list. That would be a good thing. And Mark, thank you for your time after work and on weekends and such. So we appreciate that.
I guess what comes to mind for me is kind of a two-part ask. One is kind of if Mark, from that list that you've got in those buckets, if you were to be able to kind of just help us understand on those things that we sort of must do, kind of their timeline and their sort of urgency, I guess. And then the other ask would be for each of us as commissioners to look at this list and be, prepared to, identify, not a huge number, but, a doable number of ones that we'd be willing to work on outside of normal meetings with other commissioners or by ourselves, even as Maddie has done with the side yard work, to just bring us closer to be able to have meaningful discussion. So maybe we could ask, each of us to, identify the top three things. Like you say, we there's only so many things we can actually knock out this year. So maybe we could land on a handful of things that are needed and they are of interest to us. We've heard about them from the community, and we could do some, moderately heavy lifting that would help the rest of the commission be able to engage and potentially make recommendations fairly quickly, you know, at future meetings. So maybe that's one idea for how we might prepare to prioritize this list for next time. So
Got
I
it.
guess would my fellow commissioners be able to pick four things that you yourself would be willing to lean into outside of meetings? I mean, and I'm just asking that as like, is that a reasonable ask? I think I could do it. I think I could
I
look at this.
I totally can. I heard John say he could. I know. I think everybody's been willing. I mostly made that comment, Yanni, in the spirit of listening to what Mark was saying about how shorthanded he is and how we might be able to carry some water. I know, Mark, we weren't able to work on the shoreline area plan before because and it could have been a staffing issue still, but it was never like something that could be prepped and brought to us, or maybe thought that we had enough expertise to work on that. But maybe with a little trust, like, hey, look, here's what needs to happen: a solid review, key questions, discuss them, take action, move on. Same thing with those, which is why I'm really interested to see what you think are like, we have to get this stuff done in 26. Because then I think your question's relevant, Yanni. It's just going through that list and saying, yeah, I'm willing to work on my own or with somebody else to do the initial legwork.
So one thing I can tell you, looking at this list of bullets, is I wouldn't just be able to pick some and go off on my own without knowing more about what they are. Because I just haven't been with the commission long enough, I think, to
Yeah.
be able to do that. I certainly volunteer to work with someone else who does know, but I just don't have enough experience with these topics.
Fair enough. And I think, even for those of us who have been on the commission for a little while, I look at some of those bullets and I'm not sure exactly what that is, right? So, I think we've all got a little piece of that, but at the same time, there are some items that, I do understand what they are and are ones that I might be really interested in. So, fair point. But I think we really do want to understand what some of the drivers are for some of these, and we'll need to rely on staff for that. Like this kind of has to happen. And how do we avoid some fire drills where we have to drop everything to deal with a requirement or something, an expectation, and instead get ahead of it. So,
And we're in luck. This next legislative session is 60 days.
right.
How many new mandates are coming our way that are planning related is somewhat limited. Maybe.
Right. Okay. I think what we're settling on here is we're going to look for staff to provide some sense from this list of just highlighting for us things that kind of we just sort of can't ignore, even if they're on a lengthier timeline, but things that we kind of have to do. And then we're going to look for the commission to look at these lists and, sort of seriously and think about where might we be able to apply some of our own effort and pressure to get some traction.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back to our agenda if we're done with this discussion for now. I have a part B here on new business on shared housing discussion, and I have this feeling that I don't know what this is, and that's probably because I wasn't here last time. So I'm going to ask staff or another commissioner to tell me what that is.
That actually was something that I brought up at the last meeting. And I brought it up in the context of housing affordability and even potentially middle housing affordability. But it is an idea that's sort of catching fire around the world now. And we talked about aging in place. And many of my neighbors on my street are older, and they would like to age in place, but they want to age in place in their own house. They don't want to move to another house, and they don't want to move to assisted living potentially. So, and this is I did a little research. I wanted beyond what I talked about last month, and I have found out a little bit more about this. And rather than belabor everybody with a big discussion about it, what I could volunteer for perhaps the next meeting is actually write a piece with some links. And if people are willing to look up and get a little bit of more appreciation about this topic, what it is essentially is it's the old concept of having a roomer. Like my great aunt had UW students in her house after the Great Depression, and her husband died. And I found out that there are programs and there are some good outcomes already documented from some of these programs in Washington State. Washington State doesn't have a statewide program. Oregon does. Other states do. But there are city programs in Washington State and city consortium in Washington State that have provided some mechanisms for shared housing. This provides for affordability, affordability at perhaps half the rental rate going in the region. And so I think it's a big deal and potentially can have a place for that Safeway employee to live here in Lake Forest Park. And it also can do that without creating additional density. So I think it's something worth exploring myself. And if the rest of the council is willing, I will write something that will more fully explain some of the concepts, some of the mechanisms, and some ideas about how our city can implement this.
Yeah, I guess the question I have, I mean, I like everything about what you said, and I've read about it from time to time myself, but I'm just curious, what are there, I mean, are there some obvious things that the city, are there things about city code or policy that currently discourage that? Or are you looking for ways that we might consider encouraging that? I guess I'm not entirely clear what the ask is here. Are there barriers?
I think there aren't a lot of barriers. Certainly, we talked a little bit about our single family definition being broad enough to, not say that a single family has to be comprised of blood relatives or relatives by marriage. So I don't think there are the main obstacle, as I see it, is that people just don't have the means to be able to find people and vet them. And so consequently, a lot of these programs are really just programs to help vet the shared housing participants. And so, for example, and I mentioned that, often these are for seniors. The idea is it's a senior in a home, but that's not always the case. Bellingham, for example, has a city program, and they're aiming more at young people. They're a college town, and actually they are just using a software application. And I'm not sure if the city is licensing it or paying into some kind of, or even, whether the city has any financial obligations, but they're using an application and a website. It's basically a matching site that does, background checks and that sort of thing. It's called Nesterly. Nesterly is one of several of these, organizations and companies but that in some cases, these matching services have actually been created as a public resource, with public funding, for example, in Oregon. But in other cases, they're commercial entities that are just being licensed. And in some cases, it's not even clear if the city's involved in any licensing, because the company changed. In the case of Nesterly, they charge 3%. They're like a property manager, essentially. They charge a 3% per month overhead on the rents. So the rent payments are actually made through Nesterly. So they're assuming that responsibility as well. So to me, it's just something that's worth investigating, given the fact that, as I mentioned before, that several Seattle Times articles that have been published recently that speak to the potential of this. One, the FYI guy in the Seattle Times had stated that there were 239,000 vacant bedrooms in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. I don't know how many there are in Lake Forest Park, but anyway, I think there's potential.
Well, thanks for that, and I appreciate the filler. And again, if you repeated things you said last time, I apologize for that. I have heard about this, and I think it'd be interesting for us to talk about. I'm still, it would be great if you were, just from my opinion, if you were willing to pull some examples of how different cities have either supported or provided or created some, support for these types of things. That would be really nice for us to know, because I'm just struggling with okay, what would we potentially ask our city to do, if anything. But I totally get it, and I appreciate you're bringing this to us, Maddie.
It sounds like you're saying, John, that you just wanted us to be aware you're thinking about it and that you're willing to do some work to better understand what would be implicated and actually that we might consider. Is that right?
I guess what I'm also suggesting that I could do a little bit more research and compile that research into, not a long document, but something that I could pass on to the commission for your information.
I think that that could be really helpful if it's concise. And John, I think the other thing too is when you do that research, if you think about, so what would be the ask? What would the call to action be for that? If it seems viable when you're doing the research, maybe let us know like why you think it's viable and what the action may be or the thing that we're considering as a group, because that will help maybe move our discussion along to something that you're proposing versus trying to come up collectively with the idea. Or if that doesn't come to you right away, saying like, hey, look, here's like kind of three different configurations for this. And I guess just more than just research, but some analysis on how it fits into our community could be really useful.
Okay, so a point of clarification. I think I can only go so far without actually contacting some of these organizations. Now, is it appropriate for me to do that or not?
For checking and getting facts, but you just can't represent yourself as speaking for the commission. So,
You're just doing background research.
Right, okay.
I appreciate that, John. It's a good topic, and if if you're willing to do some lifting there, I think that could be really valuable. So,
Okay.
I think we are on to reports and announcements. Are there announcements from staff or others that the commission should hear? Yes, Councilmember.
Thank you. As you may be aware, you will have a new council liaison next year. I am no longer able to do that.
Well, I'll say, first of all, just really appreciate you and all the time and the thoughtful participation you provided to us in your role. And just really want to thank you for the whole commission. And I guess I have a question that's more, and maybe you can answer this, is when and how does the council decide on assignments like this so that will we have a gap here? Going forward, or what's the timing of decisions, if you can reflect on that from your past experience, or if staff knows?
I actually don't recall. I'm here through the end of the year, and they will typically take this up as a council the first or second meetings of next year, if not sooner.
I remember early in the year, but I don't know that there's a code requirement that specifies a timeline. January, February at the latest. Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, really appreciate your service to us as a commission, but to the city overall, and wish you all the best going forward. So, and then we'll see who we get.
Yeah, and Sean, we would love to have you back. A shameless plug, we have a few empty seats, and I know you were in planning commission when I first came on, and I just felt like you helped me grow in my role and still have so much that we could benefit from. But
Thank you. I'm giving consideration to what I will be doing next.
yeah, but I want to echo what Yanni said. 100%. You have put so much effort into being an incredible council member, and I know I'll miss you on council.
Thank you.
And then with the passing of Deputy Mayor Bodie, and then stepping up and the work we did on comp plan, but our specific thank you is your assistance on the sign ordinance. Getting it through the last few important issues and finally getting that in place. Staff really appreciated that.
Okay, we're running up against the clock here. I don't see any newly arrived members of the public, so I'm assuming we don't have any public comment remaining for today. We've talked about the agenda for next meeting at length. We've got a couple of items we're going to follow up on here, some from staff and commissioners. We're going to think about which topics they might be able to dig into and so forth. We've talked about the date. Looks like it works for most people, maybe not everyone. We'll make sure we have quorum. Anything else regarding next meeting? Otherwise, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn.
Staff has nothing, but other than thanks.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn for tonight?
I motion we adjourn.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. We have a second from Cherie. We
Yeah.
are adjourned. Or I guess we should say, okay, all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks for chairing, Yanni.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. All right. See if I can not screw this up. So recording.